Welcome to episode 26
Yes.
of the Full Code Podcast. I don't know why I keep doing that intro after I already said I'm just going to pre-record the intro, but I did it anyway.
Because we've done it 25 times.
Yeah.
Exactly in that way.
You know, when you say 25, that's not like a big number,
Feels like a big
but
number.
it feels like so much.
Yeah.
Like you've done so much, you know.
I took a picture. Everyone can't see the setup right now. Hopefully.
Yeah.
We don't want you to.
Yeah.
But it has progressed
Yeah.
a lot since we first started doing this.
Very
I have a
complex.
picture of the very first podcast that me and Ron ever did. And I think we literally pretty much just had like your laptop, our computers,
Yeah.
and I held the microphone the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
Like we didn't have any of this stuff. And now there's a whole room that's a bunch of stands and cords. And
Well, it's funny, right? Because you see in a lot of the professional ones, everything's kind of out of the way and you're catching angles from, all over the place. But I'm like, I'm kind of poor, don't have a ton of good stuff. So I'm like, you can't tell when we post the picture, you'll be able to see it. But we have like lanes of vision, but there's just all kinds of stuff between us.
yeah.
But we do have a special guest today.
Yeah.
Because what did we say we can't say?
Let's just get it out of the way right now. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
But Lori is one of our organ procurement coordinators.
That works.
Who works with Mid-America Transplant. I always have
Actually,
to
why
get it
don't you
right.
tell us like your official title?
Yeah.
My official title. Well, I'm the manager of regional operations for
Hey.
Mid-America Transplant.
Wow.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a big girl
It
job.
sounds like a big girl job, but it's not a lot.
Yeah. No, but we work pretty closely together.
Yeah.
Yeah, very close. Anytime we have patients that are nearing those end-of-life decisions, then I'm coming to you guys and saying,
Yeah.
is it the right time to talk to the family right now? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Obviously, a very integral part of what we do in the ICU. We've talked about a lot on the podcast in other disease states. We obviously do what we do because we love critical care medicine and obviously because we want to help save people. But unfortunately, given the severity of illness and the escalating complexity of multiple medical comorbidities and patients' illness states, unfortunately, sometimes no matter what we do, we won't succeed there. And given the right, clinical scenario and context, obviously there is still something that can be done to potentially help others down the line and save some other lives, in lieu of the right familial circumstances and all that kind of stuff. So,
Right. So before we get too far down, how did you get here?
Great question. So this was not my career field of choice initially. I worked for about 20 years with individuals with developmental disabilities and a variety of other support needs, and then decided it was time for a career change. Went back to school, finished my Bachelor of Science in Human Services at Evangel. Took 2 years where I was working for a Chamber of Commerce as the executive director there. And in the meantime, picked up this position as a family support coordinator, part-time, 2 weekends a month. What brought me to Mid-America Transplant is actually my son in 2004 was an organ donor. Oh. And so as I kind of thought about and looked at what does my life look like, what am I interested in, I realized that I had the opportunity to give back to others and provide that, like you said, Clint, that opportunity for something good to come out of a terrible situation.
yeah. Wow. See, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah. I've heard several times, they've always said, have you heard Lori's story? And I was like, no, we talk all the time.
Sounds like a great opportunity for a podcast, though.
But I mean, yeah, it's going through the kind of the whole process, especially when you've deemed someone a candidate and you're trying to work through that process. And I think in that you can get very close to families and such, but obviously you're on the other side of that now. What was that experience like for you then?
Yeah, so obviously it's been a little while now, and I'm able to talk about it most days without tearing up. But in 2004, my son, he was 13 and a half months old, happy, healthy baby. He was the kind of kid that when we would go to the grocery store, he would reach into the cart and grab items out and hand them out, to everybody we passed. So just very giving, very lovable kid. The morning that everything kind of changed. He had woke up and had thrown up in his crib and cleaned him up a little bit, but he was still fine, wasn't running a fever, not lethargic, or a little bit lethargic. But the babysitter said, go ahead and bring him over. So I took him in because I needed to go to work that day. And a couple hours later, she called and said, something's not right. Will is never sick, but he is today just not acting himself. So I took him to urgent care. As with most young kids, we assumed it was probably some type of virus that he had picked up from daycare. And they ran some tests, said he is dehydrated, gave him some fluids, and sent us home. Not long after we got home, he did stop breathing. I had to call 911 and do CPR, and he ended up having to be airlifted here to Cox. Came here to the hospital that I now support. And so once he arrived in the ER, the trauma physicians and the ER docs and the nurses were just amazing to work with. They ran every test that they could, identified on the CT scan that it looked like he had a tumor. And they said our options were withdraw support, or we could go to surgery, and he may not make it out of that surgery. And so my husband and I both said, well, let's give him a chance, right? And so I've been that family praying for that miracle, having our loved ones standing around and moving in that direction. And little did we know we did get our miracle. It just wasn't in the way that we had wanted or expected. Then overnight, he was treated in the pediatric ICU here, and he was initiating breaths over the vent throughout the evening. But at some point, middle of the night, he did stop that. The next morning, the nurse and physicians came and said, we believe that he has progressed to brain death, and we would like to do a cerebral blood flow study. So he did go to Nuke Med and came back, and the surgeon advised us that unfortunately our son had been declared dead or brain dead. And so then a little while afterwards, Mid-America Transplant was actually the organization that partnered together with the nurse and the physician and the chaplain at the time. And all three came in and met with my husband and I and offered donation as an opportunity. And so in that moment, we both looked at each other. And I remember we both said yes at the same time and then looked at each other like, oh, you think so too? But for us, it was really about if we could keep another family from having to experience the loss that we were feeling and that pain that we were feeling, we wanted to do that.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that.
That is so profound. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing that stands out to me the most is, I'm a sappy guy, so I'm holding back some tears.
Today
right
I'm
now,
able to do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, some days.
We're both parents of little children, so obviously when you're a fellow parent, it's just an unimaginable thing what you guys went through. But your strength from the story to go through what you went through and then come back on the side of things that you are now and not hold bitterness or resentment towards that experience and think more so on the complete opposite end of the spectrum that I feel like most people would, and be like, I saw this from the other side of the table. How can I now be a liaison to help other people go through what I went through and make, the greatest gift that you guys were able to share with other families? Like, I don't know. I think it would be, I just admire the strength there, because I think that it would be so much easier to go on the other side of things be upset and, resentful and hateful and all those types of things. But yeah.
Well, it did take me almost 20 years to get to that point.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's true. But
it has taken a while to get there.
Yeah.
And like I said, some days are easier than others. But what did get us through was knowing the lives that were able to be saved.
So that being said, in your role now, do you see the whole breadth of spectrum from infant to, elderly adult and geriatric? Yeah.
So the organ donation age can go anywhere from birth all the way up. There's actually no limit to the age that someone can be an organ donor. We hear last year had the oldest organ donor at 98 years old donated his liver.
Wow. No way.
So, age is not a factor. And that's one of the things that is my role, is also to educate people in the community that just because you think you have illnesses or you think you're too old, you never know what lives you could impact and save.
That's educational for me, because I think oftentimes we think, oh, they're in multi-system organ failure, or they have all these laboratory derangements that signify dysfunction. Like, none of these organs are going to be good. Why would we, take these? But that's obviously not the case. And regardless of the situation, there may be something you can glean from that, and something that's, potentially donatable.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes what we find is what's sustainable for that patient may not be the same for someone who's waiting on the waiting list. And they might be willing to accept a kidney or a liver that is maybe not 100% healthy, but it's healthier than what they have. And if that can extend their life for a year, 2 years, 5 years, some people are willing to do that.
Wow. So how long have you been in this role now?
So I have been with Mid-America Transplant. It'll be 6 years in November. I started out part-time as a family support coordinator, 2 weekends a month from 6 p.m. on Friday night to 6 p.m. on Sunday, on call, going and speaking with families. And then I've spent the rest of that time, that was the first 2 years, and then as a hospital partner specialist in the evenings for a year, and then during the day shift, the 8:30 to 4:30. And then the manager role, I actually just accepted that about a month and a half ago. So
Is that why I don't see you as much?
yeah, a little bit. I'm still here, but right now I'm doing dual roles while I'm figuring out who we're going to have replace that position.
Yeah. I know and regionally it's so different, right? Like we've talked about this before. I've worked all over the United States, and this process is very varied from place to place in terms of how we do it, how the relationships that we have. And, you and I first met when I was a nurse, and then now as a provider, it's interesting. And maybe you can speak a little bit to, for providers, obviously there are some rules of engagement, right? But we're always trying to make sure that we are being as prudent as possible. So maybe you can speak to other providers and say, how would you recommend that you're evaluating these patients? How do you recommend when we're, making communications and saying, hey, I think, this is an appropriate time?
Okay. So one of the things that we look at, in order to be an organ donor, you have to be on a ventilator. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And so what I kind of provide education for nurses and for physicians, if they're on a vent and they've got a poor or maybe even a questionable prognosis, it's one that we think it could go either way, it's never too early to refer to us. Each different organ procurement organization has different rules and guidelines for that. But for Mid-America Transplant, we prefer to have those referrals early on. Our sincerest hope is that they're able to be extubated and recover and go home, right? And then there's no really harm for us to follow and to evaluate. But if the chance that patient kind of goes in the other direction, we want to be ready so that the family isn't having to wait on us. And so a couple of things that we have found in working with families is they've said, if we're waiting until the point that we've already had these discussions with our providers and they're advising us that it's time to start thinking about changing code status or moving to, considering trach and peg versus comfort measures. Those are all times that families have told us, come talk to us sooner. Let us know about this so that we can kind of make those informed choices. One of the things that we are very careful about, though, is that we don't ever want to influence a family's decision to withdraw support. And so it's really important for us partnering with the provider, partnering with the nurses and the medical team to determine when is that right point. And it may be that we ask to come in and talk to family just to get a feel for where they're at. And it may be that donation isn't the right time to bring it. It's not the right time to bring up donation, and we won't even mention it at that point.
Right.
We will wait until those decisions have been officially made.
I'm just curious in the sense of, we're all asked that question whenever you go and renew your driver's license or you get your identification number on, would you like to be an organ donor or not? So we oftentimes, as you know as well, being in the ICU, will encounter patients who maybe have a, what am I trying to say? Where they have
You can do it.
I can't think
You
of
can
the
do
word.
it. You can do it.
No. An advanced directive.
There
Jeez
it is.
Louise. An advanced directive they've already established wishes that they have, but then this patient ends up intubated, they're sedated, they have a metabolic encephalopathy, and now their appointed DPOA has to make the decisions, and the family, has different plans or intentions other than what we feel that the patient has expressed in, previously filled out paperwork and things. How often do you run into barriers between a person who is clearly stated on their identification that they want to be an organ donor, and if they have stated that, do you still have to get consent from family? Is the patient stated that they want to do this? I mean, how do you navigate all that?
Yeah, that becomes kind of that challenging dynamic, right? Of trying to figure out how to support the patient's wants and wishes that they've identified with what the family needs. And so the way that we navigate that is really kind of talking about who that patient was, getting to know from the family, were they someone that, would want to help other people? What does that look like? Depending on the situation will be dependent on how that moves forward, right?
Yeah.
If you sign up at the driver's license or at the license bureau, or in another manner, it goes into effect at your time of death. And so it depends on the way that the patient passes as to how that is implemented.
Okay.
So we do, at Mid-America Transplant, though, we do try to bring the family along. We don't ever want donation to be a negative experience. It really is about the fact that it can bring hope and healing to others, but also for that donor family.
Right.
And so we partner with the hospital. We've got kind of practices, policies, and procedures that we follow, as well as partnering with the hospital whenever family doesn't agree with that. So there's an escalation process that goes through. It's never just one or two people making that decision.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think, speaking to, and it's something that I try to relate to people, and you can probably speak to this as well, the donation process in regards to family involvement and investment. I always found it, especially earlier on in my nursing career when I didn't have as much exposure to it, and being like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible experience. It's going to be terrible the whole way through. And I was actually very shocked about how invested families become in this process, and how sometimes it doesn't work out in the end, and it's almost surprising there's an even greater disappointment that they weren't able to see it all the way through for whatever circumstance it was. But that's something I try and relate to, especially newer nurses. Like, don't underestimate the level of involvement that families can get from this. I think on the back end of it, I'd be interested to hear your perceptions on this. And I've noticed this again regionally. Perceptions of donation are wildly varied, and in some areas that I've been in, it's like everybody's game for it. Yeah, we're going to do it. In some areas, it's like, I don't want them coming in here. That perception, and it's hard because, again, maybe you can speak to this too. How do you navigate these intrinsic perspectives, but also how do you do it in the setting that you're almost always talking to somebody who's in a deep state of grief?
Absolutely. And I think we have family support coordinators that is their sole training, is how to help families that are in that deep grief situation navigate that. And so they're very good at really making sure that the family knows we're here for you. This is about you at the moment and what you need. So I'm going to help you address your needs first, and then we're going to move forward from there. So I think that's the first part of it. The other thing that we look at, every person that says yes to donation, we honor them as a donor hero. So the family gets a medal of honor, just like you would if you were a firefighter or an EMT, someone that goes into a burning building, whatever. We our donor heroes get medals as well. And then we provide support for the families. We connect them with grief resources, a resource center. We also have a phone line that is operated that they can call in and talk to someone whenever they're struggling after the fact. And that can go for a week or two. It can go for 20 years, depending on what that family needs. We are there to help support them.
Wow.
We also provide different grief workshops for those families to get them together with other families who have lost a loved one that donated, because sometimes talking to somebody else that has been through it can also help you kind of in your healing journey. And so we do provide that for the families. We're there for them as long as they need it.
I think that's awesome that it's not, from the outside looking in, it seems kind of like a one-stop shop, one-trick pony. Like, we're here to help with this process and see if we can, help this person make this donation and save other people's lives. But you're really offering services to this family, this person, for potentially years and years and years surrounding the entire process of it all, including the grieving process. So,
yeah, absolutely. And our belief is that we take care of the family. That's going to help them to then make those decisions to want to help others, right? And so the family is the center of what we do. There are transplant centers and there's organ procurement organizations, and they keep those separate for a reason. Just like we have, the hospital is the one that makes the determination of time of death. We don't call that, right? So we keep very clear lines, very ethical boundaries, so that the family understands our role and what the hospital's role is, and then the transplant center's role is even separate from that.
So then you get a follow up on this, right? So you've been doing this for 6 years now. So I'm assuming that you've created relationships and things that have lasted for potentially the entirety of your career in this area. I mean, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I've made some pretty amazing connections with families, with physicians, with nurses. Ron, you mentioned, have you heard Lori's story? It always excites me whenever somebody asks, well, how did you get into this? Because then I get to share my son's story. And that is a way that Will continues to live on.
Yeah.
And then hearing that from other people, it's amazing to me every time I teach a class, every time I talk to someone, the different people that have been impacted by donation, personally and professionally. Whether it's a recipient, it's somebody they know that donated, and sometimes they're not great stories. Sometimes it is a difficult time, but we're able to kind of talk through that. And I've had families tell me before, I didn't donate at this time, but looking back on it, maybe I would have if circumstances had been different.
Yeah.
How would you, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the kind of the effect of grief on the caregiver, meaning you or nursing, right? As we talked about before, I think that this process can absolutely, one, tear you up, regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on. And I think about my very first donation case as a nurse, and I remember, I'll not go into the details, but it was an individual who had self-terminated in a very violent way. And that was the first time as a nurse I'd ever seen that. And one, it deeply rattled my cage in terms of, there's certain things that you see. Obviously, medicine can be a very graphic and traumatic place, but there's a visceral experience when you see something that intrinsically shouldn't be there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But sometimes things should be on the inside and they're not. But, I remember I think I spent all 3 of my days with this family, and I was by no means an expert at that point in my life, but I knew, where this was going. And I remember our organ procurement people were there, and they were like, do you want to go in the OR when we carry this out? And I was like, I don't know about that. Right. So they're like, listen, if you want to, we'll call you when it's time. And I was like, okay. So it was like a midnight or something, and they called, and I didn't live very far from the hospital where this took place. And I was like, yeah, I guess I'll come, And retrospectively, so glad I did, because that, I think, helped me experience closure in that moment where, and there's so much hustle and bustle. There's people flying in from places, you got special teams coming for this, special teams coming for that. And everyone is, there's like a balance between almost an excitement of like, we have this opportunity, we need to take it, mixed with the grief that overlies everything. And then when it's all said and done, you're just like, it's like this deep exhale where you're like, it's over, it's over. And luckily in that case, there's a lot of peace. But, what has been your experience from your side dealing with, people in your organization or nurses as far as dealing with that grief? Because, it's one thing if you work in, let's say, CVICU. I won't pick on them again, but I would say a good bit of their patients get better,
Sure.
Right.
But, when I did neurosurgical intensive care, a good bit of those patients didn't get better. And that would wear on people deeply. And in your role, that's all you show up to is that situation. This is the worst day of your life. And now we have to have a really tough conversation. And you're trying to make sure that they understand that you're here because you care. And we're trying to make the best out of the situation. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so within our own staff, the majority of us do have some type of tie to donation, whether it's we've had a loved one that's donated or there's a loved one that we had that was a recipient. So I think that's a unique thing that we have amongst our team. But then in addition to that, we do on a regular basis talk about the trauma that you experience, because it is secondary trauma, both as nurses and as the staff that we have that are working with the families. So one of the things that a few of our team members do is they'll find out something that the individual liked. So maybe it was their favorite food or their favorite activity. And once everything is kind of completed and the recovery process is done, they go out and they celebrate that individual. And they might go and have, if they had Andy's was their favorite ice cream or whatever, custard. They would go and have that, or they know they liked basketball. So maybe they would try to find a basketball game or go shoot a couple of hoops, just as a way to kind of bring it back full circle. We recommend that they do those things because that does kind of help that healing process. With nurses, I've talked with several that talk about how, yes, it is very hard during that time because there is a lot that we are asking of them. But then whenever they see and get to hear the end result of what lives were able to be saved, it brings some meaning to that loss, which they don't always get to see, in other situations.
Right. I love that it personalizes each individual scenario. If you're going and celebrating a particular thing about this one patient, this one person, it's very intentionally specific to them. And it's not just a celebration of, we were able to get through this process. The family was able to agree. We were able to, donate these organs and help other people. Like, that's a win in and of itself. But we're also ensuring that we're celebrating this individual and what they've accomplished in this and everything. So I think that's very cool.
Well, and I like that too, because it shifts sometimes the focus away from the nature of what happened.
Absolutely.
And kind of like the story I was saying, where that was a point where we were able to, I think, redirect our gaze and say, like, let's not look at this as disease process or mechanism anymore, right? What's done is done. Yeah. Before we get any further, how are we doing on time?
I think we're getting close to needing to wrap things up. We're okay.
Doing okay? Okay. So, we talk a lot about the grief and the process and a lot of your background. I know we try to aim this podcast at everybody, a lot of times, pointing back towards kind of the providers. How do you, because obviously in some cases there's friction. I mean, and I mean that in the sense of historically, right? And I won't repeat some of the things that are said, right, historically, but there's common, almost idioms that people always say, like about procurement. And maybe in my experience, it's from people who are of a much older background or have some sort of skew, to it versus, in nursing school, even now, like we talk about this, from the get-go, this is a part part of it, but how do you face those biases? I mean, it's really what it is, right?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I look at is, first of all, people have an opinion about donation based on their own experiences, right? And so I want to know what that is.
Or lack thereof,
Or lack
right?
thereof.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. So whenever I hear that somebody maybe has a concern or about it, then I try to find out and dig a little deeper to figure out what is the root of that. Is it they need more information because they don't understand or don't know kind of where that comes from? Is it that they, maybe had a bad experience? Because donation happens across the country. There's 56 different organ procurement organizations. We all have kind of the main standard that we have to follow, but we do it in different ways. And so I think one of the terms you were probably looking at is sometimes I have heard people say, oh, they're circling like vultures. Yes, it is. It can be a trigger for a lot of people. For me, what I look at is that's an opportunity for me to provide some education.
Right.
And so I do, again, try to find out where that's coming from. And then that may be an opportunity for me to share my story. Or for one of my coworkers to share our stories. And really, at the end of the day, it is about taking care of families and leaving them better than we found them.
Right.
That's really where our focus is and what we want to do and be a partner with the hospitals in doing that.
Right.
I'll throw myself under the bus here.
Here we go. Here we go.
No. I mean,
Here's
honestly,
the real.
Truthfully, in the past, I do not have a profound personal experience with this, so I don't. What I have been exposed to has been in healthcare systems regionally here, and we can just say we're in the Midwest, right? So
Everybody knows where we are.
A little bit more traditional beliefs and things like that. Not that I'm opposed to it all, but from a provider standpoint, with the lack of knowledge that I had in the situation, I think that you get very caught up in the medicine side of things, and I'm trying to do everything I can to save this person or to ensure that they have a good outcome or a favorable outcome. But now after having this conversation and being able to take a step back, you're trying to accomplish the very exact same goal. It's just if despite all of our best efforts, we don't succeed, you're also trying to ensure that we have the best outcome possible for this patient and for this family and for other patients out there. And so I think removing some of my own bias, but also acknowledging that it's, I think you can almost take it a little bit personally of like, oh, well, they don't think that I'm going to be able to save them, and we're not going to be able to turn this around. And that's not the case whatsoever, And so
that's actually a really good point, is the kind of the ego that's involved sometimes,
1,000%.
and in a way, right. It's really great that nursing manages it on their own for the most part, as far as notification immediately, because not everybody is so open to, for me, obviously we've cold fit a good relationship. Sure. I've had a lot of, donation experience in the past. So when I see something that looks terrible, I'm not like, well, let me see I'm like, go ahead and make that call, right? I'm going to push him to make that call. But there absolutely are individuals who are like, no, we can do this. And it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no harm in letting you guys know.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I hope that you can do that, that you are able to help that individual to be able to recover. That, why wouldn't we want that, right?
Yeah.
It's just, if it isn't going to go that direction, we want to be ready to be able to support that family if it's appropriate.
Yeah, the ideas that people get in their head is just wild, and especially with the way things propagate on the internet and, conspiratorial thinking where, I've even heard people talk about like, well, they actually sell those, don't you? And I'm like, I don't think that they do.
No, it's illegal to
stuff.
sell.
And I think,
it would have to be black market, and we do not do that.
Yeah, and people need to understand how many, I know, I say need to understand as if it's common knowledge. It isn't. There's so many guardrails in so many areas in medicine to keep us in check in that way. A perfect example is the billing and coding department, right? Like they send us messages all the time, and I very happily try to reply at my earliest convenience all the time. But sometimes they ask questions that I don't know the answers to, and I have to say, well, what if this? And they're like, I can't tell you that. And you're like, well, why not? And they're like, because I can't influence your decision
In
making.
your professional opinion, please choose.
Yeah. My professional opinion is ill-informed right now, But yeah, I think, and I'm glad all the things that you've said so far, because I really think it does illustrate that, kind of some of the stigmas. Like, it's not like you got a bucket of ice in your car and you're waiting for us, and they're like, are you sure you don't want to call it? And you're like, no. Like, at the end of the day, we want you to recover, but we want you to do your best. Just in the same way as if I call you, I'm not giving up. Like, I'm not going to stop doing my job all of a sudden, right? Like, I want this to happen, but I want the best outcome regardless of what that outcome is.
Well, and, if you're on the other side of that situation, it almost, and again, easy to say while I'm sitting here, right? But it almost helps bring a little bit of light or, to the situation, in a very grave situation where you can be like, okay, well, the providers have just told me this, this seems like this is non-recoverable. That's just detrimental news to hear. But if you get a little tidbit, a little bit of light to see that, well, there is a potential way that, despite this horrible loss, that we can still do something of meaning, and that my family member, this patient's life, not that it didn't have meaning before, but then in their last moments, they can still have purpose and meaning. I think almost kind of takes away some of the...
And it changes the ending of their story too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to end. Sometimes it can be a tragic situation. Other times it can be, something that was just sudden that we didn't expect. And then other times maybe there's some history there that may have not been the best with the family, right? And so this is a way to kind of help change that script, change that narrative. Their story doesn't end.
Now, you said you have your bachelor's of science, right?
Yes.
You don't have a nursing degree or anything. Say we have nurses coming out of school. I'm assuming you have individuals of all kind of experiences and clinical educations on your team. So what if someone feels very passionate and led about this? What would you recommend to them to do to kind of pursue this as a career path?
That's a great question. So in order to work for an organization as a nurse, we do require at least a year ICU experience, ICU or ER, so that you have that critical care background, at least a little bit of that. And then you can look at our website. We do hire all the time for those variety of different positions, wide range of different job opportunities, and it depends on which area you want to go into. If it's the clinical side, we do have people that manage that clinical aspect. They work directly with the transplant centers to try to find recipients and honor the gifts that the families are given. Our family support coordinators might be nurses, might be people with a social work background, things like that. Pastoral care, a variety of different ways that people come to our organization, and we just look at what is the best fit for you at that time.
Now, this podcast was originally created with the intent of reaching out towards critical care APPs. Obviously, we're reaching out to everyone who works in the critical care space and trying to branch all over.
Give up that ghost.
Well, does your organization employ any mid-level practitioners or physician providers or anything like that? Or is it just up the chain to kind of like nursing and...
Yeah, so we currently have 2 chief medical officers. One is for internal affairs. So Dr. Markland kind of works directly with the nursing staff. He oversees everything that they do and it provides guidance as needed. And then our chief medical officer for external affairs, Dr. Allison Gildehouse, she works in the hospital setting. So she's just started with us a while back, and she's coming around and getting to know all the different providers. Her role is really to be a resource for APPs, physicians, anyone that needs that, to provide that clinical expertise and help answer questions for them.
Awesome.
Now, you have a whole other facility up north of here that you do a lot of in-house stuff up there, right? If you're able to.
Yeah, so it depends on the way that the patient passes away, how how they are declared. If it is a patient that's declared brain dead, our organization has worked to create a facility where the patient is transported from the patient's hospital, still on a ventilator. They are transported to our facility. And we have kind of a miniature ICU. So we call it our donor care unit, or DCU. It's a 8-bed facility, where we're staffed 2 nurses to 1 patient. And part of that is because once they are declared brain dead, they do have a time of death. They remain on that ventilator. And sometimes it may take us 3, 4, 5 days to really optimize the vitality of those organs. So we have patients that we will, once we transport them up there, they may be placed on CRRT. They may need a bronch. They may need additional imaging to try to optimize those so that we can find additional gifts or additional recipients of those gifts. And so that would be a lot of strain on a hospital to keep them here, because we would have to have nurses here. We would have to have physicians still monitoring. Whereas our facility, we're able to transport them there and continue to work with them until we have everything placed. Every gift that they have to offer has been placed. There's recipients there. And then we set an OR time there. So we do have an OR. We have our own lab there, our own imaging facility. And anyone can come and tour that anytime that you'd like. So
Very cool.
Check it out. I've not been in the building. I've been outside of the building. Very impressive.
well, you need to come and be inside the building and check it out.
The architecture.
Spot on.
Nailed it.
It's interesting. Up in when I was in the Northwest, we had one primary organization that covered that region, and I actually don't know if they have like a standalone facility. I assume no, because of how the wide area that we covered. But whenever we were going towards the donation route, things changed drastically. They had usually 1 or 2 nurses that would come, and they would work, I think, directly. I know they had a bunch of algorithms, but they'd also work directly with a transplant physician. And then usually on our side, it hopefully became a one-on-one, because they were such busy patients. You're drawing, and I don't think we do it. It's not as intense here just because the way that we carry out is different. But I mean, as soon as you hit go, you're drawing like 30 vials of blood. You're getting lines in, you're doing all those things. And I know that structure is different all over the place. I have an old colleague who, somewhere in the American Southwest, who was a respiratory therapist actually beforehand, but sounds like they have a similar situation where they have their own standalone facility. They put in their own lines, arterial lines, central lines, do their bronchs, all that stuff. It's just wild. I think there's so much to this process that people don't know and don't see. So it was really cool up there, how we got to fulfill that role, even though it was very, very difficult.
Well, I think it'd be interesting in the future to glean some more light on the more clinical and medicine-based side of, once that decision is made.
Well, it's funny you say that.
What all entails,
Yeah, I think
metabolic disturbances, improving vitality of certain gifts that can be, and the lines and all that kind of stuff. I think it'd be very interesting to outline that process in a little more depth.
Well, I know Lori's had some conversations with my executive assistant.
Yes.
Yes.
On the payroll.
my wife, who does a lot of this stuff for us. But I know you have some other resources that we're looking at down the line, and we have some more time to sit down and cover that.
Yeah.
So that opportunity is definitely coming, as long as you're willing to come back.
Absolutely. Would love to.
So before we finish things out, is there anything that we haven't asked you, any last tidbits of advice or golden nuggets you'd like to throw out there?
That's a really great question. I think I would ask to be open-minded about donation and realize that just because we're coming and asking you, is it the right time to talk to this family, does not mean we are trying to push an agenda, trying to get anybody to do anything beyond what you normally do for your patients and for the families that you support. I know sometimes we ask about, is it time for brain death exams? That's really just trying to get an idea for our staff to know how how soon are we looking at we might need to be having conversations with this family? Ultimately, you all are the medical professionals. These are your patients.
Some of us.
These are your patients, and we want to be a partner in that process when it's not going to be someone that's going to be able to lead.
What resources, or this, I'm putting you on the spot on this one, if you may know something off the top of your head. You're such a literate person. You probably have some good things to throw out there. Any recommendations as far as any reading, books, articles, things like that that may be beneficial for someone to read if they either, have a lot of interest in this area, or potentially if they want to help sway their own mind?
Sure. So I would always recommend that you go to our website, midamericatransplant.org. And we're on all the different social media outlets. We have stories about donation on there, and that's a really good resource. Donate Life America also has some definitely some information about donation that is helpful. And then there are a lot of peer-reviewed articles. The New England Journal, I think, is one of them. I've got a couple of different ones that our medical director has shared that I'd be happy to share those articles with anyone that needs those.
Yeah. I cannot remember the name of it. I promise I'll post it when this comes up. There is a book, you may know the name of it, that's about the history of transplant. And they go through like history of CV transplant, like what is it? Is it the University of, one of those Midwestern states. It's a huge transplant center.
When you figure out that book name, let me know. I'd love to read it.
If we weren't filming on my phone, I have it on my phone. It's such a good and very fascinating book. I know we're near the end, so I won't get into it, and I don't mean this in a negative way. The history of transplant was so brutal in the sense of you had to have some of the bravest pioneers who were willing to try and people who were willing to participate, because there were so many people who had bad hearts or bad livers. And, back when they were, attempting all these different types of procedures, it was, we tried or nothing, or you'll end up dying. Right. And when I think about it, again, when I find the book title, I'll send it to you. It's such a good book. But I just think about the spirit that must have been in those healthcare providers and those people who were attempting those things, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was the heart stuff. The amount of failures before they had their first success was massive, and these physicians who were involved in this dedicated their entire lives to this, for decades and decades and decades. But when I figure it out, I'll put it out there, but it's such a good book.
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes in the organ donation world. And actually, even in the 6 years that I've been here, it has changed dramatically. So all for the better, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there is another book called, it's called The Emperor of All Maladies. And it's basically a history of cancer. And it's, even the audiobook's like 26 hours long, and I got bitter about it and I had to finish it. You know what I mean? But that's one of those books where, a very large portion of those treatments, because they went all the way back to ancient Egypt, some of the things that they would do, treatments hadn't really changed that much from a surgical standpoint. They were still, they're still doing the same things now. We have obviously targeted therapies and cell therapies and all this stuff now, which is, amazing cutting edge stuff that I can't fathom, and even there's so many components, which is why I'm excited to get down later into the transplant medicine side of it, where there's so many things where it's every time you turn a new coin in a different area of medicine, you're like, I had no idea it was as complex as it is. But that is something I'm excited to get to. But thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. You wanna do your thing?
Yeah, I think it was an awesome kind of change of pace for something we do traditionally. I hope a lot of people listen to it, enjoy it. Hopefully everyone out there listening and watching has figured out that we are now active on some of the socials as well. So you can follow us on the Instagram or on the TikTok at the Full Code Podcast. Email us at thefullcodepodcast@gmail.com. Still working on the website and other things, but we're coming along.
And hopefully
It's a work
there's
in
progress.
right?
Yeah, well, there's
albeit slow.
there's a ton of progress actually in the background, and I'm hoping by the next time we're doing something like this, we will be in our dedicated studio at that point. So, because right now we are crammed into a small office in the corner of a parking garage.
So that's been episode 26 of the Full Code Podcast. We do appreciate Lori being here and sharing her story. We appreciate all you guys listening, and we would appreciate it if you would give us a thumbs up, give it a like, share it with your friends. It does help us reach more people as far as the algorithm goes.
It really does.
Does help us out. Go ahead and follow us on YouTube. You can see our beautiful faces. And we'll be coming back at you guys soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.